Hello, and welcome back to the channel. According to the 2020 population statistics, did you know that only 53 million people out of 329.5 million in the US live on the West Coast? That is like a drop of water in the ocean, considering that the US is the third largest country in the world. Well, you might be surprised to know the reasons why. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's video. What are the demographic sparse zones on the West Coast? Areas or regions with very little population compared to the rest of the country are typically known as sparse zones. This could be due to a variety of reasons such as harsher climate, low economic development, infrastructural issues, etc. In the western U.S. coastline, sparse demographic regions such as Northern California and Southern Oregon are marred by issues such as the absence of human settlements, sluggish urbanization, and the lack of transportation infrastructure. Moreover, the demographic sparse regions on the West Coast don't have a lot of major cities or towns. Instead, you'll mainly see rural settlements and smaller communities, compared to cities such as San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, etc. A prominent characteristic of a demographic sparse zone or region is the fact that they have bigger natural landscapes, such as forests and/or conservation grounds or parks. Moreover, these areas don't have a lot of man-made constructions, such as buildings and structures, and there's a lack of industrial development. What is the importance of understanding the reasons behind low population density in the area? Regions with low levels of population usually coexist with untouched natural landscapes, precious resources, and wildlife. However, it's equally important to understand the low level of population in these areas. Moreover, knowing the ecology of sparsely populated demographics on the West Coast can also help the federal government incorporate more accurate and streamlined measures when you talk about urbanization and infrastructural development policies. It gives a more precision-based outlook on the viability of populating sparse lands without harming the surrounding ecology. Moreover, low population regions will always present developmental challenges and often lack the necessary infrastructure such as roads, communication lines, electric grids, etc. Understanding the geography of such areas can help provide planning and development authorities decides how and where to invest capital to build healthcare facilities, road networks, and utilities, helping small or rural communities thrive. What are some glaring factors that contribute to the low population of the West Coast? The western U.S. coastline is renowned for its diverse wildlife and rugged and unforgiving terrain such as mountains, forests, and deserts. Now the problem with this is the fact that the terrain or natural barriers of these regions don't necessarily provide a lot of options in terms of flat land, making it more complex to build roads and infrastructure. It's also equally important to understand that a majority of protected lands in the U.S. are all located in the West. These lands comprise national parks, wildlife conservatories, and reserves, making it even harder for infrastructural development to prevail. From an employment perspective, the western U.S. coastline doesn't particularly present communities with a lot of well-paid job opportunities or economic development, mainly due to the lack of industry. The job market in sparsely populated areas isn't that attractive, which is often why many people migrate to urbanized cities, such as Los Angeles. What are the contributing geographic and environmental factors involved? When you talk about beautiful and serene flora and fauna, it doesn't get any better than the western U.S. coast. The region is chock full of awe-inspiring mountain ranges that almost stretch throughout the entirety of the coast. The most well-known among these mountain ranges are located in the Sierra Nevada, followed closely by the Cascade Range. On the southern half of the coast, in different areas of Arizona and California, you'll see a vast expanse of desert and barren landscapes, particularly the Mojave Desert. The West Coast is also quite famous for different types of active volcanoes such as Mount Rainier and Streak Helens, both of which are found to continuously modify the surrounding landscape. This is also one of the reasons why the region is famously known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. Moreover, you'll also find a slew of pristine river basins and valleys deep within the mountain ranges, such as the Central Valley in California. In addition, there's a vast network of rivers that flow into and out of the West Coast, connecting with the Pacific Ocean. A lot of the landscape in the region is also canopied by rainforests, both coniferous and temperate, along with thick woodlands, which is where you'll find a diverse range of wildlife such as different species of birds, deer, and bears. On top of that, the West Coast also sees the brunt of different climates coming in from both the Mediterranean and the Pacific Northwest. What is the impact of climate on settlement patterns? Regions in the western U.S. coastline often have to contend with continued water shortages because of the semi-arid climate conditions. Some parts of the Southwest, as well as California, are particularly affected by drought, making things difficult for people who have to rely on man-made water resources. In addition, the poor water supply has also devastated much of the agricultural economy in the region. The communities in the area have to take special water storage measures and ensure that they don't waste any. Furthermore, settlements along the deeper areas throughout the western coastline also experience gut-wrenching summers and bone-chilling winters, depending on the type of elevation or latitude they're located on. Both these extreme climate conditions can have adverse effects on energy consumption, property and infrastructure maintenance, and the general quality of life. It's also important to mention that because several regions on the West Coast are impacted by the Mediterranean climate, which is blisteringly hot and humid, it propels the risk of and causes frequent wildfires that have put nearby settlements and properties directly in harm's way. Communities in areas that experience a lot of wildfires urgently require more definitive fire mitigation and safety protocols, such as the construction of fire-defensible living spaces and building codes that can help mitigate the risk of fire damage and loss of life. From an economic point of view, the housing market in the western U.S. coastline isn't cheap in any sense owing to natural disasters, which is what causes a consistent increment in insurance costs, driving property values through the roof. What are some historical and cultural factors associated with the West Coast? Tribes such as the Tlingit, Nootka, Chinook, and several others dominated the western U.S. coastline thousands of years ago. They have a vibrant history when you talk about land use practices, which were mainly tied to their way of life in matters such as sustenance, survival, and culture. The indigenous communities at the time were largely hunter-gatherers that primarily depended on fishing and storing vital food sources. Moreover, the tribes often engaged in commerce, trading precious resources amongst one another, further creating access to resources that they couldn't find in their own environments. Preservation of traditional territories. One of the most important issues for indigenous communities living on the West Coast has always been preserving their sacred lands and territories. It's a fundamental facet of both their environmental and cultural conservation. Why? Well, that's because the descendants of native tribes have historical, ancestral, and cultural ties to these lands. With that being said, a lot of native tribes living at reservations have been fully supported by the state government and legislature in terms of practicing their rights to self-determination and governance. They have been given complete autonomy in managing and policing their territories, which ties directly into their rights to resource management and land use. In addition, Native communities work hand-in-hand with land trusts and other organizations to continuously form the basis for a conservation easement. What was the influence of European colonization and westward expansion? The systematic colonization, led by the Europeans in 1492, wreaked havoc. When you talk about native population displacement and dispossession, indigenous tribes were forced out of their lands and driven toward the edge of the settlements on the West Coast. The use of excessive force and compulsion were the key strategies used in removing numerous tribes from their rightfully owned and controlled territories. Where force and violence were used, European settlers and authorities resorted to creating one-sided land treaties that were never honored. Another devastating impact of European colonization related to the complete dishevelment and destruction of tribal cultures and languages. A lot of cultural practices and traditions were obliterated. Settlement patterns and routes during the 19th century. Fast forward to the 19th century, the West Coast saw a boom in both infrastructural and settlement patterns, thanks to the influx of a variety of reasons, such as the creation of lucrative trade and economic activities, strong legislature and federal policies, advancements in technology, and the abundance of natural resources. The California Gold Rush 1848, for example, helped attract thousands of families from across the globe. Moreover, during the Gold Rush, cities such as Sacramento and San Francisco were chosen as prominent urban centers. What were the early economic opportunities for development? The West Coast, in the 19th century, experienced a mighty economic boom thanks to excessive industrial developments, economic reform, and job creation. All of these factors played an instrumental role in helping settlements, communities, and major urban centers transform into economic hubs. One of the more prominent industries at the time was timber and lumber harvesting. Because the landscape was surrounded by forests, we're talking about Northern California and the Pacific Northwest, wood and timber were abundant. As a result, new lumber mills were created to meet the building and construction demands at the time. For instance, the region was particularly renowned for timber species, such as redwood and Douglas fir. Coming in at a close second was the mining industry. Thanks to the 1848 gold rush of California and the abundance of silver in Nevada, the region experienced an influx of both veteran and newly established prospectors, who permanently settled in areas such as Virginia City and San Francisco. Limited sustainability and decline of these industries. However, there was a flip side to this magnificent economic boom. You see, while industries seemed to prosper without measure, there was a gradual yet eventual decline in natural resources that ultimately led to the death of most of these industries. Businesses simply became too difficult and expensive to maintain. For instance, advancements in technology, at the time, led to the development of steam-powered lumber mills and the construction of railroads that made things more seamless, putting a lot of people out of a job. The technology effectively changed the dynamics of the industry, wreaking havoc on the environment and eliminating traditional practices. What were the conservation and environmental protection efforts made? The federal government played an instrumental role in helping develop national parks and monuments along the West Coast to maximize the protection of precious landscapes. These efforts have helped place a permanent restriction on infrastructural development, specifically for designated areas. The areas under protection have limited any sort of human activity, especially those activities that result in environmental harm. In addition, a lot of municipalities throughout the western U.S. coastline have implemented several zoning laws and regulations on land use that have barred construction and real estate companies to develop residential or commercial structures in these sensitive areas. Moreover, property owners have also resorted to various conservation easement laws that prevent their real estate to be used for any type of construction or development, maintaining the flora and fauna of the landscape. Influence of environmental awareness on local attitudes. It's also a pleasant surprise to know that people living on the West Coast are very environmentally conscious and go out of their way to protect and preserve the picturesque and serene natural landscapes of the surrounding regions. This is particularly why you'll see agricultural businesses resorting to sustainable farming and agricultural practices to help lower carbon emissions. Plus, this also helps harvest food that is organic and free from chemicals. In addition, the region also sponsors and hosts a plethora of green events, environment conferences, and emissions-free festivals that help bring in a lot of other like-minded people to not just attend, but to consider permanently settling on the West Coast. It's also a joy to know that plenty of cities on the West Coast rely on sustainable public transportation. Moreover, the region is also known for how bike-friendly it is, constantly pushing for greener initiatives to help save and protect the planet. What are some important urbanization and social dynamics on the West Coast? When you talk about lucrative employment opportunities, a potentially stable job market, and a good business environment, it doesn't get any better than the West Coast. Moreover, it's also considered one of the best places to live in the U.S., thanks to the high quality of life along with the availability of top-notch amenities and cultural attractions. Silicon Valley is a prime example of the region's innovative and accessible startup culture. Similarly, San Diego is another city that promotes the entrepreneurial spirit and has a successful startup infrastructure, which plays a big role in attracting education and skilled individuals from all over the world. Moreover, another great thing about cities on the West Coast is the fact that they offer seamless access to healthcare facilities, have excellent academic environments, and are overall great for living and thriving. What are the modern challenges and opportunities on the West Coast? After the COVID-19 pandemic, and with gradual innovations in digital technology, it is no longer necessary for people to travel to work. Millions of people work from home in the U.S. thanks to the boom of technological hubs in West Coast cities such as Seattle, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, all of which have played an instrumental role in helping people get jobs in sectors such as IT, software development, web design. Potential for population redistribution. As sea levels begin to rise owing to global warming, and due to worsening weather conditions, people living near the western coastlines are inclining towards resettling in inland areas. In addition, continuously increasing housing costs aren't helping at all. But with the prevalence of work-from-home opportunities, many people are considering transitioning into more affordable housing in different urban cities. Potential for population redistribution. As sea levels begin to rise owing to global warming, and due to worsening weather conditions, people living near the western coastlines are inclining towards resettling in inland areas. In addition, continuously increasing housing costs aren't helping at all. But with the prevalence of work-from-home opportunities,